When I was a teenager and rented the Resident Evil remake on the GameCube, my first foray into the series, I don't think I had the patience for it. Movement was clunky, the tank controls seemed more like an oversight than a purposeful hindrance, and the immediacy of an entire mansion full of locked doors probably put me off, unlike the charm of Mario Sunshine or the open sea of the Wind Waker. Eventually, I pretended I was Steve Irwin the zombie hunter and put on an Australian accent for my brother. I tried to kill the first zombie you encounter with a knife while saying things like, "Oh, crikey! And we've got a real biter on our hands!" But more than a decade onward, I learned more about the series' beginning and the place it holds in gamers' hearts, more specifically the heart of survival horror. I'd loved Resident Evil 4, I liked 5, and as I got older appreciated the tense and daunting elements of games like PT and Outlast. But it grew on me that I would eventually have to see where it all began. Like the literary classics such as The Great Gatsby, For Whom the Bell Tolls, or Brave New World, I realized it's important to partake and understand a piece of gaming history. So after taking down the Tyrant and riding off into the sunrise, I'm realizing perhaps I've been spoiled by the streamlining of modern generation's mechanics. Resident Evil, despite remaining on par with the best in survival horror in setting and atmosphere, suffers from some outdated gameplay structure like item management and, granted, rarely vague and frustrating puzzles. Resident Evil 1, as we all know by now, begins when Jill, Chris, and the rest of the STARS Alpha team is sent to investigate a distress call from their teammates. After being chased into the isolated and insidious Spencer mansion, players are left to discover the fate of their friends alone.
No.
Jill, go and investigate.
I'm going with her. Chris and I go back a long way.
For the most part, secondary characters have a strange habit of being in the right place at the right time.
Barry.
That was a close one. A second late, you would have fit nicely into a sandwich.
The mansion, as I've only shamefully now just realized, is one of the greatest levels, environments, settings, stages, whatever you want to call it, in gaming history. It's deceptively large, but starts off small, perfectly leading the player in with elegant, well-kept rooms, but slight things that seem off. A painting of two fencers stabbing each other, notes left by inhabitants plotting a desperate escape, or a stained glass window of a witch. In the grand tradition of, quote, "It was a dark and stormy night, ... fog creeps in with sudden flashes of lightning, giving the mansion an eerie glow. Every room feels lovingly detailed and intentionally crafted. There's no greater feeling of relief than walking into a small closet with a typewriter and an item box instead of a new creature you haven't seen yet. As you collect keys, more and more of the rooms open up, which slowly unravel the scope and severity of what's been happening in the halls of the Spencer residence, and slowly dawns on the player that despite what they've seen so far, they haven't really seen anything yet. There's a creeping uneasiness knowing that there's something you haven't discovered yet crawling around on the floors beneath you, which Resident Evil has nailed completely. The lighting from the candles, the ominous music, moans of zombies, crows, door squeaks, the breathing of crimson heads, the mechanical shifting machinery, fireplaces, everything is really just perfect. Voice acting is more miss than hit, a result of some of the script, I'm sure, but while some people may claim they were going for a campy tone, I'm not so sure they were.
We'd better secure our escape route first. There's gotta be a back door somewhere.
All right then, let's split up again.
See you later.
Ciao.
Jill.
Barry, I didn't mean to get you that excited.
Right. Anyway, you should read this.
Bravo Team's helicopter was a derelict.
Not only from an aesthetic point of view, the level design of the mansion is also very well paced and thought out. I wouldn't be surprised if they hired an actual architect to design the mansion and the grounds. The longer you play, keys and tools you find open the area up with various puzzles, and monsters to break up the exploration. Some puzzles are a joke, some are difficult, but most are well thought out and require the player to have paid attention to their surroundings, memorizing locations, salvaging notes found on desks and beakers, and actually require some cognizant thinking. This isn't always the case, though, as because you're never told where to go next, which I did like, but it did result in lots of aimless wandering around the mansion looking for the one piece of the puzzle I'd missed, randomly running from room to room, hitting the interact button on every wall, which eventually worked, allowing me to progress the game. Also, restricted item management, while I'm sure can be very well argued leads to tension and decision-making, Felt like a chore more often than not, and really only serves to pad out the game as you have to backtrack to an item box every 15 minutes to put away each ink ribbon and green herb you pick up. On the other hand, a more cautious player will keep them on hand at all times, as even backtracking through cleared areas will often surprise you with new enemies or traps. Thankfully, as I progressed through the game, I found more weapons at my disposal than Steve Irwin's survival knife. In addition to your issued pistol and blade, players can find a shotgun, grenade launcher with different types of damage-inflicting rounds, magnums, and more. They all feel extremely well balanced. A pistol is effective against the zombies, but not much else, though you can always be sure to find ammo. A shotgun will be your best friend against the faster foes halfway through, so you'd better be sure you kept a stockpile on hand, and more powerful weapons I imagine are a borderline necessity for the endgame bosses, though knife speedrunners I'm sure are quick to scold me otherwise. And the monsters. You can never be sure of what kind of effects the dispersal of the T-virus had on not only the residents of the Spencer Mansion, but surrounding wildlife as well. Hunters, crimson heads, snakes, spiders, sharks, even bees all pose a threat, and you're gonna have to make sure the door you're planning on using to escape is unlocked when they're on your pursuit. They're genuinely scary, tough to bring down when in swarms, and while I was usually well stocked with grenade launcher ammunition for the bosses, they kept me on the edge of my seat with some terrifying designs and aggressive movements. Despite its outdated tech and playstyle, I really enjoyed my time with Resident Evil. I would like to play the original one day, but the latest remaster, as far as I'm concerned, will end up being the definitive edition. The puzzles are fun, the mansion is fascinating to explore, and still holds up as an original, despite its design and mechanics being reproduced in nearly every survival horror game since.
You have a way with understatements.
I, and many others, prefer the action and story of Resident Evil 4, but the pacing and design of the Spencer Mansion is one of the pinnacle of video game levels, and one I won't soon forget.